Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to Aquarius Rising Africa. And let me get my laptop straight. And welcome to KERRI Saint on Focus with Australia. Beautiful to have you here again with me, KERRI. It's such a
Thank you, Chantal.
pleasure to always have you. We always have amazing conversations, and I really like where we're going with the show. Really, really cool. But before we get over to you, I just want to say again a shout out to our sponsor, who is Spooky 2, the creators of home Rife machines. And you know, guys, this is so interesting. I don't know if you know the story of Spooky 2, but the original creator was actually murdered um, for his inventions. This machine, really. It's an amazing, really an amazing machine, and really amazing people that we're working with here. The Spooky 2 team. It's a range of home Rife machines, and they go to great lengths to create their own frequencies that are in line with nature. So they really are amazing energy medicine, as I call it. And I want to just talk about, they've got a 2-day conference coming up soon. Mona, if you can just put the ticket up. There we go. 11th and 12th of November. And there are still a few spots available. So you'll be able to meet your trainer, who's Jonathan Ellis, and he will talk you through and take you through exactly what everything is about, how to use it, what it works for, all of that. So tune into their website, which the address is below. And if you want to purchase your own Spooky 2 machine, you're welcome to do so by dropping my name and for a 5% discount on your Spooky 2 rock machine. We're going to stop for an ad break halfway in between. So in the meantime, thank you, Mornay. KERRI, I'm so grateful to have you. How are you? It's evening for you, morning for me. How things going in Aussie was?
It's been a bit of a tough week or two since I spoke to you last. I'm doing okay. I'm doing well despite what I'm going to tell everyone, and that is that my biological father passed away last week. He was 88 years old, and I'm going to try not to cry. I knew I'd get on here and I'd start. So I wanted to title tonight's talk on the lost fathers, because the last interview that we did was with Dr. Chris Cole, and we brought up the dads. Hello, Danielle. There's a couple of people on here I know. Yeah. So we talked about the dads, and we talked about, the misconceptions about their involvement and non-involvement in the adoption process. And I've brought up issues around birth certificates and fathers' names not being allowed on those birth certificates. And I kind of thought, with the passing of my very own biological father, I thought I would like to kind of bring him into this conversation tonight. So a little bit about his story and honour his memory.
I think that is so important, that we honor the fathers in this process as well, because in my journey as a healer as well, so often we forget the men, the fathers. Fathers are so often the ones that have to be the strong ones in the family, and be the one that doesn't cry and make sure everyone is okay and comfortable. And there are many amazing fathers out there who are that way, and I know there are those that aren't as well. But the world is a big place and takes all sorts to make up the world. However, I think also in my journey as a healer, KERRI, it's interesting because I've met several men who have fought tooth and nail to get custody of their kids. And those guys we don't often see much of. They are the silent heroes, I'll tell you that much. They don't scream and shout and make a big song and dance about it. They get on with it, they do it. I've watched men with teenage daughters take them to buy their first menstrual products, take them to buy their first bras, you know.
Yeah.
It is such a beautiful thing to see a girl trusting her dad that way, you know.
Yeah.
And so there are certainly men. I've seen men who've fought for DNA tests, you know, because they want that baby so much, and the mother just will have none of it. You know, we get that as well. And I think especially on our show with Dr. Chris Cole 2 weeks ago, it was really, really amazing. So if those of you haven't watched that interview yet, I really want to suggest that you do. An incredible story. What an amazing lady as well, you know.
Yes.
You know, yeah, we started speaking about the fathers in this these scenarios, you know, when they lose their children, or like in your biological dad's case as well. You know, I think there's many of those situations that go unnoticed.
Very, yeah.
Yeah. So I'd love to hear more about that from you.
Yeah. Okay. Where would you like me to start? I can give a bit of a picture out of a study that was done around fathers, and there was only, so this was really important. This is the past adoption practices. It was a survey that was done, and it was done in Australia by the Australian Institute of Family Studies, and 830 adoptees got involved in this study, and it was phenomenal because it was the first study ever done here of such a large collection. And then there was, I can't remember the amount of mothers, but it was way more than the fathers. And I can give you the number of fathers that they actually found to actually do this study. How does it's only about, I think there was about 15, something like fathers that they managed to find to actually do the study. So you've got 15 fathers. I think we had you had 830 adoptees, and I think about half of them were mothers. So it was phenomenal on a number of reasons. The fact that this is the first time adoptees really had a voice. We'd had the inquiry, but very few got involved because they didn't know that they could, because they called it former forced adoptions. And 90% of adopted people had no clue that their mother had been forced to give them up. We had been told our mothers willingly gave us up. I knew that my mother had forced to give me up, so I got involved. So very few adoptees got involved in the inquiry. And not long after the inquiry, they started, getting information out. They wanted people involved in this survey. So there was a number of fathers, and it states that there were 12 fathers. That's the low number. 12 fathers have been separated from their child by adoption. And this was an online survey, but they got to do a few face-to-face interviews with some of the fathers. And at the time of actually doing the survey, the fathers were aged between 58 and 70. It says here that the participants of study are by fathers separated from a child by adoption, and it's quite limited, perhaps a reflection of the sentiments of the New South Wales Parliamentary Committee, in that fathers were often not an active part of the equation of adoption. The challenges associated with recruitment of this respondent group was multiple, yet not unexpected. We were only able to meet face-to-face with 3 fathers, and just 12 completed the online survey. So that just blows your mind. Like, we're talking about 250,000 children were taken by forced adoption, and all they could find was 12 fathers to do the survey.
Well, why do you think that is? I'm sitting here trying to figure it out. Do you think that that's because the fathers didn't know necessarily, or they were not interested? They just kind of...
I don't think it's that they weren't interested. I think when you find out, it gives a clue at the back of it. on their well-being. So based on their response to the K10 measure, 1/3 of the fathers were likely to have a poor mental health at the time of the survey completion. Almost all of them showed some symptoms of post-traumatic stress. 64% were severe post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. So if you're calculating that these fathers are suffering severe mental health, these are the dads suffering severe mental health at the time. So they're struggling. They're not going to poke their head up. They got pot shotted at. All society turned on them. They weren't even included in much of the process. And it was by either the girls' parents, their own parents, the churches, the authorities, the institutions, the hospitals, the police. So they just had to kind of scurry back in because they were threatened with jail and all sorts of things and carnal knowledge and the whole gamut. So you're expecting them to then turn up 50, 70 years later and go, yep, I had a kid, right? So this is why we only got 12. I was quite shocked when I read it because it was like 12 others. So when I think about my father and the involvement that I had with him, what a lucky person I have been. So my dad, I didn't meet until I was 24 and knew nothing about him at all. And I'll get into that in a minute. So they basically, they pointed out that 1/3 of the fathers were aged 17 to 19 years, and 1/3 were aged 20 to 22 years, and 1/3 were aged 24 to 32 years at the time that the child was adopted out. I want to quote what one of the fathers actually said about his experience. He said there was a system in place within the church, government, and hospitals that were highly structured, like it was a predator. It had a predatory feel about it because it was just out there and the eyes are looking at it, the child, it goes, that's it. And I would have thought that once they had their eyes on a target with a view of vulnerability, age, time, the whole lot, and this is the problem. The girls at the time had to handle it, and I don't think they stood a chance. There was a big force in action in New South Wales. So he saw them as predatory, and they didn't have a hope. So they said that 2 of the fathers married the mother of the child and are still married. 2 fathers continued a relationship for a while after the adoption before splitting up. 3 fathers were forbidden to have contact with their mother. And in 2 cases, the relationship was destroyed by the pregnancy and adoption process. So the trauma of losing the child often separated the couple, even though they wanted to stay together.
Well, isn't that what happened with Dr. Chris Cole? That's exactly
Yes.
what she said. Although she was, I think, 16, her and her boyfriend were together. They were willing to. Wow. And it just shows because in that particular instance, her parents were against the baby, right? But she went into the hospital or the home for unmarried mothers or something, if I remember correctly, thinking she's coming out with her baby.
Yes.
And her parents.
No intentions of this child leaving her arms at all. And I think she had intentions of being with the father or being supported. And that this is what they did. It was predatory. They target them. And, I have met so many mums that said the father wanted to marry me. There's a lady that I'm hoping that will come on and be interviewed. Her name's Jane Cashin. She's the wonderful lady that's done all the artwork for my book and the songs. And she says that she was actually engaged to the father when she fell pregnant.
My niece is living in Australia. She was 15 when she fell pregnant. She must be 26, 27 now. And she told me the story when she went in. She said, in Australia, now we're going, I mean, her son is just around about a teenager now, right? I'm not sure his exact age, is somewhere 13, 12, 13, somewhere around there. But she told me recently that when she went into this place, there were young mothers, there were doors that were pretty much security gates on the wards. And she said, most of those young girls left that hospital without their babies.
Yeah.
She was obviously one of the lucky ones because my sister was there and they very much wanted that baby. So I think maybe the fact that her mom was supporting her was a plus. I'm not sure.
And that's the key, Chantel. That's the key. They targeted vulnerable mothers to whom they could threaten and coerce and break away from any supports. That's who they targeted. If you were a strong woman or you had strong supports from any family members, they didn't get your child. But the mothers who didn't have those supports in place, they were the targeted ones. They were the easy targets. They would break them down, and they would not only just work on the mother, they worked on the father, and they worked on the prospective grandparents, and this is how they did it. So the girl wasn't just fighting the system when she went to the hospital, the social workers. She was looking at her parents to save her, and they're feeling the impact of the hospital or the authorities or society to force their daughter. And you can imagine the impact that, and like Chris, she went home without a baby and her mother's like, telling her to suck it up, basically. And it's not till many, many, many years later that when the truth comes out, what they experienced by having their baby taken and how they were treated in the hospital institutions, that the weight of their parents breaks down, and they have been adversely affected by the pressure that they put on their own daughter or feeling helpless so if Christine was 16, I don't know, I haven't asked her the question, but she could have had younger siblings at home. And I know this has happened with other mums, younger siblings at home, and you've got mum and dad who want to fight to help you keep your child, but you'll have welfare come along and go, if you help her, we will take not only the baby, we're going to take the younger ones in your care because you're not good parents for not helping to hand over this child.
It's shocking. It's truly shocking.
Yeah.
It's like, my question is, that is so immoral, right? It is so, I don't even have the words for that, because to decide whether you keep your baby or not, them to make that decision for you is disgusting to begin with.
Correct.
Right.
And all these mothers back then, they weren't drug addicts. They weren't abusers. They hadn't abused a baby, so they deserved to have, this protective order over and protect this baby, not sure it's not harmed or killed. They were just single. They didn't have that wedding ring on their finger. That was it. And we're not talking about young girls as 14, 15, and 16. We're talking about, in Australia, the average age was 19. That was the average age. I know what I was doing at 19. I was married and running my own business. So it's just begs belief to know and understand that these things happen to adults, not young helpless girls. And a lot of these men had jobs. And
I'm going to put Dragonfly's comment up here.
Okay.
Mine was a forced adoption by my maternal grandparents. Mom was 17 and dad was 19 and in the Marines. Mom and dad did get married and had 3 children. I found them when I was 37. I'm 64 now. Well,
Yeah.
Dragonfly, I love you because you're a regular on our show.
Yes.
So it's really, I truly hope that your reunion was successful. And I'm always sorry to hear these stories. I
Yeah.
know that in the bigger scheme of things, you know, this is
Yeah.
some amazing journey that is blind to the naked eye
Yeah.
between God and you guys that have experienced this. But man, oh man, it's
Yeah.
so sad for.
Yes. They actually did some research into, like, did these dads, you know, actually want to find their children, and most of them did. Um, they were racked with a lot of grief and trauma over the loss of a child. And they said they received very little support at the time of the pregnancy, birth, and separation. And 6 fathers reporting having no support at this time. Could you imagine it? And one indicated that he had not needed any support. As one father articulated in a group discussion, he states, there was a lack of permission to grieve. You weren't entitled to do that as a father. So,
That's just my, kind of like just highlights what we've been saying.
yeah, yeah,
Their emotions were never really so. Well, you just impregnated the girl. It's okay. Like
yeah,
you got nothing to say in the matter. It's all about her now. She's got to go in there and give the baby and what have you. But the fathers left standing on the sidelines, feeling helpless and powerless. And let's just think about the male archetype, right? The male
mm,
psyche. It's in his DNA to protect.
yes,
That's his baby and his woman. Whether
mm,
they're married or not is immaterial. He's in naturally, if he's obviously got emotions towards her, it's his natural instinct to want to protect and provide safety and security.
yeah,
But in that system, they are completely stripped and emasculated
yeah,
of that base need that a man has. So
yes,
that, can you imagine how that act on a subconscious level or conscious level, depending on
yeah,
the severity at the time,
yeah,
how
yeah,
that actually destroys the male psyche as he goes along. And
yeah,
as we know, men don't really talk about their emotions. So I'm sure that a big reason why a lot of these men haven't come forward is because they've buried that so deep
yeah,
in their psyche without realizing that it's probably affected them in 1,001 different ways throughout their lives, right?
yeah, yes,
So this is the thing. It's like when I look at this, I can see how expertly these dodgy ones, the dark ones, have manipulated these types of situations because
they've
they know
made
exactly what to erode. They know how to erode human emotion. That's
yeah,
it.
they've made the fathers null and void. And um sorry, they they tried to do that with my dad. They tried to make him unimportant, and of no effect in my life. My mother's name was at least on my birth certificate. My father's name was not allowed. I couldn't imagine being made to feel so insignificant in the world. And we're expected that these men were then to go out into the world and create other families and a life and be responsible, knowing that 64% of them, at least of this group, 12 of them they found were suffering severe post-traumatic stress disorder from that. And so, in knowing that this is what they did to my dad, that's why I kind of felt like it was so important to me to make sure he was never insignificant. And um, I know that there were attempts made to stop me from finding my father, and society was trying to tell me that he was no good because he had, you know, done something terrible by having a relationship with a woman outside of marriage. And it didn't matter what anybody said to me. You could have said he was an axe murderer. My father was still significant to me, because in finding my father, I find myself, and I needed that. And so I pursued that with every fiber of my being. I took a massive risk in doing it because I didn't know if I was going to be rejected. Growing up, for me, I was made to feel insignificant. Everything about me, like all my needs and wants, and you know, I was made to feel insignificant. And so, you know, pushing through all the rhetoric around adoption and all the fake stories and all the attempts to disparage both my mum and dad, it didn't work on me. You know, and I pushed through it, and I pushed through everything that was said about me as a person as well. And I'm hopeful I can do this justice in sharing my dad's story, because I want to share that my dad wasn't perfect, and none of us are. And we all make mistakes with our lives, every single one of us. And I didn't want myself to focus in on a mistake. I focused in on what I could make the most positive out of the relationship with him. And so it took a long time to get to really know my father, and for the truth of who he really was to be exposed to me. Because I think we all know that when we have relationships with people, we often judge them just on what we see, just on a behavior or a brief moment and time, and we make a judgment on that. For me, I see that, but then in my brain, I go, what's behind that? There's a whole story behind that behavior, and that's the person I want to know. And that will give me key to who they really are, right? So we might just put that to a side for a minute. So I'll share a bit about my dad. And behind me is a shirt, and that's my dad's shirt. That was a shirt that I bought for him. And I want to share that when I found my mother, my mum and I wrote to each other, and in a visit with her, I wanted to know who my dad was. She'd written me a letter some months before saying his name started with P. He was an artist, and he taught her sons, who are my older brothers, the drums. And for those that don't know my story, my mum was 34 when she was pregnant with me and was a widow and had 4 children. So she wasn't a helpless little young girl. She was a woman who had been married and had a life together and was capable of raising me, but she didn't have family support and was forced to give me up. So I go to visit her, and I figure out that my mother is very uncomfortable about wanting to tell me who my father is. It was all she wanted to tell me, didn't want to tell me any more than that. And she lied to me in telling me that he was away. I was in the area for a period of time, and he was away, and that he would not be back until I actually left the area. I was up in the north of Australia, up the very many miles from my home, and I was pregnant, and I had a 3-year-old child with me. So then I stayed with my family for a month and visited my brothers and my mother. And I had made up my mind the day that I was getting on the train, after I realised my mother had lied, that I would visit her a couple of hours before I caught the train. I had my bag and my baby. I sat my bag down and I said, right, Mum, I want to know who my dad is. And straight away she knew, and she went, nope, not telling you. And I went, why? And she's like, well, no, the boys don't know their father. I don't think she knows yours. I don't know what the boys are going to think of me. And I said, well, that's not important. I said, the boys don't need to know who my dad is, but I do. And I said, and by the way, I'm not catching the train until you tell me. So I just planted myself in the chair, and she said, "I'm not leaving." So, this I was a bit shocked by my behaviour, but I kind of thought, well, no, we'd had contact for a couple of years, and I thought, no. So finally, she said his name, and she promised me that she would contact him and let him know that I wanted to have contact. And I go home, and I'm home for a couple of weeks, and then I get a letter in the mail and a photo of my father and her reneging on telling him that I existed. And I was absolutely gutted. And so I then figured out, how am I going to do this? I can't just ring him up. Any adoptee, but it's very rare an adopted person would pick up a phone to the biological parents. It is much better to have a third party do it. And so I had a friend who was also an adoptee, and we arranged for her to call him and tell him that, and ask, did he know she gave him my mother's name, and he ended up saying yes. And he said, well, I have a young lady here who believes that you are her daughter, and this is her phone number, and she would like for you to have contact, and it's your choice. I left it my dad's choice. If he said no, I would have left it at that. And a few hours passed, and I got a call, and he's on the phone, and he's all excited, and I'm going, are you sure? Like, no DNA back then. I'm just going, are you sure I'm your daughter? And he goes, yes, and you've made me the happiest man alive. And I just broke down. I said, if people know my story, what I went through with my adoptive father, he is a man who says, yes, you're my daughter. And I got to meet him for a couple of hours, and we kind of clicked straight away. But he wasn't sharing a great deal about himself. It was very hard for him. And he told me that I had a couple of sisters, and he was married, and that, yes, he'd had a brief relationship with my mother at the time. Anyway, we write to each other and everything, because he travels. He lived a long way away, and he traveled. And basically, just getting to know him and found out a fair bit about him. And he was always warm and welcoming, loved my children. And then I wrote to him one day, and the letter got returned to sender. And I lost him for 8 years, and I thought I had no way of finding him. And I thought, had he died? I had no clue. And then anyway, I was up in Territory visiting my mother, and I did a bit of detective work, and I actually found him, and he was living with his daughter. And I rang him and spoke to him, and invited him to my home, and he eventually came. And when he came, he walked into my home, and he was standoffish with me, and he was kind of questioning why what's happened in 8 years. And I was like, well, I sent you a letter, but it got returned to sender. And he didn't believe me. And lo and behold, I'd hung on to that letter for 8 years with the stamp returned to sender. And I went to the cupboard, I gave it to him, and I watched my father put it in a shirt very much like this one in the pocket. And he put it in, he saw it, he put it in the pocket, and he did this. And then he walked outside. He said, I'm going for a cigar, but you could see him breaking. My dad had thought I'd rejected him, and he had done nothing to try and find me, which told me a lot. There's something happened in my dad's life that he didn't pursue looking for me, all right? So not long after that, like, he's 70 at this stage, and he decides, he's had enough of work, and he's going to retire. And he came and he stayed at a caravan park. He's going to travel around Australia. And for 2 weeks, every day for 2 weeks, I got to talk to my dad and physically touch my dad. And Monet, there's a photo there of my dad and I together hugging each other. Do you have that? Can you bring that up?
Okay, he's in the back room. Yep.
Is he there? Is he gone to sleep?
He's shrugging his shoulders.
No, I sent them to you, Chantel, and can you pass it on to Mornay? And I'll
Yeah,
keep telling the story. So there's about 3 photos I sent through to you, and there should be a photo there of my dad and I hugging each other.
When did you send it? I would have seen it. I've got nothing here.
They're in your messenger.
Possible, yeah.
Right.
Okay, well, while I find it, yeah, do you just want to carry on?
All right. I can show you. Hold on. With the camera. Hold on then. Let's try that.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
That's my dad. And you can see that we're father and daughter. Like, that's just crazy. So he's 70 and he's decided that he's traveling. So I got to meet him, and I got to see a man who was the funniest person you'd ever met. He had been a children's entertainer on TV for like 15 years, and he brought some footage and he showed me some of the footage. And does anybody know who's that very famous actor, Australian actor, Paul Hogan, that holds up the knife? You know, my dad's skits were exactly like those. And I laughed, and I was starting to get know my father really, really well. And he told me a story of when, so my dad was a clown, right? So he would tell me that he was doing a fundraiser for a bunch of children, and he had a car that he had to loan, and they were sort of hitting cars, and the guy that loaned him the car in this racetrack had said he didn't care about anything else but the tires and the motor. And my dad's driving around and they're bumping into other cars, and the car conks out, and he says he gets out of the car, and he said he had a whole bunch of firecrackers and gunpowder in the back seat, and he lit it, and there were a whole bunch of clowns coming out, and Dad's waving them down. It's going to go. Don't go anywhere near it. And apparently, because I'm looking at him going, are you serious? You did this? He says, yeah. He says, the whole thing went up, and he says, and the whole thing went on fire. There were sparks going in the crowd and everything. And I said, well, so what happened to the car? And he said, well, have it this way. He said, the guy got his battery back. That's what he wanted, but it was that big. And he said, the tires were the brightest thing in all of the city of where we were living. So he was a bit of a character. And so basically, he shared a lot with me, but then he traveled around Australia, and he was gone for 18 months or so. And sadly, he suffered a stroke. And when he came back to me, he was not the same man. And that was really hard to take. And he got quite frail. He did get better, but he got very frail, and he suffered, from health issues right up until the time that he died the other week. And so while he was unwell, there was a book written about him, about his life. And so here's another photo. So these are the things I find out much later in his life. So there he is in his as a clown. So
yeah, sorry, I saw you sent those this morning. I didn't see them until now.
Oh, that's all right. That's okay. So this book. So you know how I said, certain behaviors up front, and we judge people by it. And because my dad told me that he was an orphan. My dad pretty much lied to me, told me he was an orphan and didn't know his family. And I when he got sick, I did some more detective work and found out that he was not an orphan, but he'd been in an orphanage. And I ended up writing to my father's brother and sharing who I was. And I ended up finding more about the family and how and why my dad ended up in an orphanage. And So we talk about generational trauma, and I think about in the context of, why did my father feel so disempowered to stop me from being adopted? And we often forget that our fathers have their own history and that they may not have had the charmed life. And when they come into our lives or as adoptees, we can be really, really angry with them that they missed the boat in being there for us, or they're not measuring up. But I began to understand that my father had lived a very parallel life like myself, that he'd had a very similar experience. And so he was a little boy, and his mother had a number of children. His mother apparently had been an orphan and married a man who became an alcoholic and an abuser. And my dad's 8 years old, and his dad was beating up on his mum, and my dad went to his mum's aid, and he ended up being tossed out of the house and living on the street. And he had to steal food to survive, and he gets caught, and he basically is carted before the magistrate. And when his father is present, and he says he was in basically jail at 8 years of age with criminals, and so he basically so he says his mother was subjected to regular bashings when he was 8 years old, and she declared that she'd had enough and packed up the children and took them to Katoomba, which is down south of me. And he basically spent time around nuns and stuff. And then he's now been, his mum and dad get into trouble, and he's now brought before the judge, and the judge asks a few questions of the father, and he basically says he's rubbish. I don't want him. I don't want him back. And so my father ends up in a place called Mittagong Farm for Boys. And the person that writes this book did some research in the Mittagong, into the institution. And here's the words of my father. He says, burnt into his brain, even after 70 years, is the inhuman treatment that I received as a child at the hands of the sadists purporting to be the guardians of vulnerable and young children. Mittagong Training School for Boys, run by the Child Welfare Department, was a new name given in 1947 to what had been the Mittagong Farm School for Boys. It's an institution for boys aged 8 to 17, convicted in the children's courts. In 1976, Mittagong Training School ceased operating, and the boys were transferred to the Ormond House, Thornlea. Mittagong Cottage Homes closed in 1976, and Renwick, a home for dependent children, also described as displaced orphan children and wards of the state. There are varying descriptions of the facility on the internet, ranging from saving children from jail to house of evil. In 2009, Jackie Mears from southernhighlandnews.com reported the 115-year history of the various Mittagong cottage homes, and their role has become a tale close to the heart of Mittagong history. She states her connection with the homes began in the 1950s when her mother worked in the hospital on the property. So basically, it was a place for displaced children, and she said the struggle for individual families to feed additional youngsters was real. So many people would put their children in these homes. So my dad was the only one in the family that was actually put into this home. And in the book, he talks about some of the abuses to which he was subjected to. He ran away, and he pretty much, he kept running away from authorities and joining the circus. He said he was routinely bashed by the other kids and by those that ran the orphanage. So when I found this out about my dad, and I think about the time that I was conceived, my dad was like 24, and I started to realize a lot about why he would lie, why he would conceal things, why it was difficult for him. When did he ever get the support and encouragement to, and the guidance to be a father?
KERRI,
know,
I think that's a great, I want to take that thread further in just a minute. We just need to stop for an ad break. But I think that's a really important point you've just touched on there. I mean, that in itself is 5 shows alone, right? But I'd love to take it further. We're just going to stop for a quick ad break.
Hi all, this is my dog Cleo. She's 15 years old and she's a min pin. 2 years ago, she broke her molar on an antler, and we had to get her dental surgery, and we had to put her under. Everything went well in her surgery, but unfortunately afterwards, the worst happened, and she had a really negative effect from the anesthesia. Really, really bad. She couldn't digest anything. She started to become allergic to everything. She was gulping, reverse sneezing, basically throughout the entire day. We weren't sleeping. It was just this terrible nightmare. So I've known about Spooky for quite some time. In its earlier days, I was looking into Rife technology for my own benefit because I had a long history of autoimmune disorder, and I researched what was really helping people, and especially learning about energetic medicine. I decided to get a Rife machine, and Spooky popped up in my search just as the most affordable Rife machine. So this is the setup right here. We started her in June, and it is now November. So that's how long it took. I also have her on immune system balance and healing and regeneration. Plus now, we didn't take her to the vet to get more x-rays, but she's not making those hard gulps anymore. This is a miracle, because it was every day since that surgery, and it helped. And it's a miracle. It is nothing short of a miracle. She's doing amazing. She's 15 and she is beautiful and vibrant again. And we can play rough, we can run, and she doesn't stop anymore in pain or sneezing and gulping. So obviously we recommend Spooky to anybody, to human and to animal. It really was the missing link in our regime, right? Good health to all.
Just love that little dog's eyes at the end there. I mean, from the beginning to the end, I mean, animals are the most beautiful, expressive, such pure spirits, really they are. And when they're pissed off, they'll let you know they're pissed off.
Definitely, yes.
And when they're happy, there's just no stopping it. So I always love to see things like that. But KERRI, just to go back to what you were saying, and I was listening with so much interest because it makes so much sense, We judge people by the end result of what they've become, right? And then we label them schizo or psycho or narc or whatever it might be, right? But it's so good. And that's what I think one of the things I love about you is that you actually took the trouble to go and research, your dad's background. You didn't just take it at face value, right? And you understood. There's such a gift in understanding. Seek to understand. So to understand his beginnings, I'm horrified. How does someone just say, "I don't want him, take him"? And you just leave this innocent, vulnerable child at the hands of you don't know who, and the excuse is, "Oh, well, he's been taken care of by the system." And every single time we've seen movies or read stories or whatever about this stuff, they're telling us and they're showing us what they're doing to kids in these places. Yet somehow parents still thought maybe if you really didn't have the food and you really were giving your child to that place because that was your intention, is that they can eat. Even if I don't eat, my child must eat,
Yeah.
Maybe, but just to give a kid up like that and for him to feel like he's completely unworthy, unwanted, unloved, unimportant. I mean, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
In the scheme of things, you know, and knowing now, why didn't fathers fight for their children when the women fell pregnant? Well, my father was made to feel totally insignificant as a child. How could he possibly feel significant against the authorities that already took him as a child? How could he possibly have had a voice? It was inconceivable for him to have a voice. And the more that I found out about my dad, the more I was drawn to him, the more compassion and empathy I had, the more understanding I had for him, because I had experienced similar. I didn't blame him for anything. That was the crazy bit. I just understood completely as to why he was so secretive and untalkative, and he didn't open up about himself. I thought the stroke had mostly affected that, but there were things. He'd talk about the weather, and he was so charming and beautiful to me and so encouraging, but he kept so many secrets. And then, you know, I could have been really angry with him that he lied to me. I probably had an opportunity to meet his mum and his sister, whom he dearly loved. But my dad carried so much guilt and shame for having a relationship outside marriage. He carried guilt and shame from his childhood, from the abuse that he suffered. He became an entertainer because he needed to fill the void, that all the alcohol and the cigarettes that he took in was to fill the void of the lack of feeling, you know, that he belongs and he's special in the world. Many people that go after, you know, endless relationships, you know, he was married at the time, he did the wrong thing, but I get it. I get why he was empty. I get why he kept pursuing. He needed this cup to be filled. I need to have a sense of my worth. And rather than looking to God, he looked to the bottle, or he looked to entertainment, because that made him feel better. And he was such a giver. He didn't hang on to it. He did give. He gave to the people around him, and that made him feel good. So I wasn't, you know, I know when I had to divulge to him that I'd found out his secret, and I sat him down and I was crying. I was terrified I was going to lose him because I had found out his secret. And anyway, I let him know when I cried a bit, and then I could tell he wasn't really happy. But about 3 days later, he calls me and he's on the phone to me. And I said, oh, because he doesn't normally call me. It would only be a couple of times a year. And I said, oh, I only saw you the other day. Is everything all right? And he goes, no. And I go, well, what's wrong? He says, well, I'm really angry with you. And I'm like, well, why is that, Dad? He says, well, because you went around my back, and why didn't you just ask? And I'm like, well, Dad, I said, that's okay to be angry. That's perfectly fine. You can be angry. I'll let you. That's fine. And it took the wind out of his sails. I said, go and be angry. I said, but Dad, I did it because I was tired of the secrets. And then he said, I don't have any more secrets. I'm sorry, but I'm still finding out the secrets. I can tell you now, there are secrets I had about him that he had no idea I know, right? And that may be for another video, but this book doesn't come anywhere near close on the story of my dad. And the beautiful thing is that, for those that don't know, I lost my youngest child 6 years ago. And my dad got quite close to my sons. And I could see my youngest child, I could see my dad and my youngest child, they were like two peas in a pod. He had passed it down genetically to my children, something so beautiful. And I would see them together, and my son, he was like, 15, 16, 17, he'd walk up to my dad and he'd go, hey, you go, and pops and put his arm around him, and I could just see the light come up in my dad. And when my son passed away, my dad was terribly sick. He shouldn't have been driving, and he drove hours to get to me, and he just sat with me. He just sat beside me and held my hand, and I had lost my son. And it was after that I noticed the lights go out of my dad, a bit more than what they were. And I nearly lost him a couple of times. And I was not allowed to meet my sisters. I knew that he struggled, and they kind of knew about me, but they were protecting their mum. and at some stage their mum passed away, but my dad nearly died, and my sister saw the message on the phone, and out of the blue she contacted me. This is probably about a year after my son passed away. She contacted me and let me know he wasn't doing well, and this is the first physical conversation I'm having with a sister, a biological sister. And so I go to the hospital, and my dad, he looked dreadful. I walked in, and he sees me walk in, and he sees my sister, and he's freaking out. Like, he's got oxygen mask on, he's skin and bone, and I had to reassure him. I said, it's all right. My sister, your daughter has allowed me to come, and it's all in agreement. He was fine. And then 20 minutes later, the younger sister walks in, and you can see him having another freak out because the secrets are out. They're just out. And then all went well. And I think he realized, there wasn't some implosion, right? There wasn't some catastrophe happen by us meeting, right? Because I respected my dad. I didn't force myself to go and meet my sisters. I respected that, and I gave him time to adjust. And this was, God worked it at the right time for the right reason. And I remember when I went in the hospital, because we look alike, as sisters, we look very alike. And I remember I went in to see him, that he had some visitors, and they were leaving, and they turned around to come back, and they're like, are you his daughter? And I'm like, I looked at Dad, and I looked at these people, and I said, I think Pete better explain, right? Because I thought, for me, I felt he's the one that needs to say it. And here's my dad pretending to be asleep with the covers over him. I said, you're doing what you did as a little boy. I could see it. I could see he wasn't coping. So I didn't blame him. I never felt rejected by it. I didn't accept that this was on me. This was the way that my father coped with trauma, right? But over time, when I went to the hospital and I shared my songs with him, the songs that I wrote, Chasing Rainbows, and that, because my dad was a musician. And I remember he was in a hospital, and he's in a ward with other people, and I wanted him to hear the second song, and I'm playing it down low. Then I've got all the people in the ward going, what is that beautiful song? And of course, Dad's like, turn it up. And I'm like, okay. So everybody's going, what is that song? I said, oh, well, I wrote it. And my dad was so proud. And I said, oh, this is my dad, and he was a musician. And they all said, wow, the apple didn't fall too far from the tree. These are just special, special moments to me. And, it was a connection that we had. So anyway, my dad was put in an aged care facility because he was deteriorating. And I would visit him as often as I could. And I'm just so amazed at the level of how I was treated in the process. When my mum died, I didn't get a phone call to say she was even sick. I was never invited to the funeral. I was not included, and that just gutted me. My biological mother died a year after my son died. So I was terrified that this may occur with my dad. But it didn't. I was invited to sit with him. My sister rang me and said, things are really bad. You need to get to him. And I spent 3 special days with my dad before he passed away. And I remember sitting there with my sisters, and I actually said, in the moment we're sitting around the bed, and I said, I really want to thank you guys for allowing me this special time with you at this, because I thought, wow, I know I'm his daughter, but I felt like perhaps I was intruding. And I said, I just want to thank you for allowing it. My sister just turned around and said, why wouldn't we include you? And I was like, you're kidding me, like that. She was offended. I said, thank you, but in a nice way. And I really felt that because I was included in that process, and I was there for my dad for the last moments of his life, that it really helped me to heal and let go. And he left with such a peace on his face, and we embraced, my sisters and I embraced over, the loss of our father, and I have, through the whole journey of it and being so respectful to them, is that I understood that they loved their mother dearly, and that my father had hurt their mother, and they wanted to protect her, and I wanted to honor that. And that's why they kept me at arm's length. And that would have been very hard for them to accept that their dad had had a relationship with another woman and had a child to her. And so these are all the intricate things that come in with being adopted, and in working these relationships. They're hard work, they're hurtful, they're painful. You're triggered. What you perceive as rejection is often their hurt. And I mean, everybody knows what I went through with, being rejected time and time again and abused by my adoptive parents. So there was always the threat that, I felt that if my dad didn't treat me right, that perhaps I would feel this overwhelming sense of rejection, and I would be triggered and then retaliate on him or disappear or act out or be angry. But I kept the perspective of my dad isn't just that act of having a relationship with my mother outside marriage. He's not just the person in front of me. My dad is 70, 80, 60, 50 years of a lived experience with very much the same traumas of myself. And I just left it at that. I accepted him for who he was, met him for where he was, and didn't expect too much of him, And I think many adoptees fail to do that. They fail to understand that the very people they meet as their parents have had a horrific trauma and are struggling to cope with it themselves, and they're not going to act normal or accordingly or perfect or whatever. Yeah.
I think as someone who's observed these situations a lot in my life, and as a healer, I've worked with quite a few people who've been adopted and parents who've given up their kids for adoption, And I think you've brought up something so significant in your conversation, where you said there are so many intricacies involved with reconnecting with families, because oftentimes, yes, it is a man who's had an extramarital affair, right?
Yes.
And or sometimes it is a mom who had you when she was 15 and really just could not afford to keep you and has kept that a secret, and suddenly when she's 60, ploop, there you appear, right? So it's a whole thing for that person if they haven't dealt with their secrets, right?
Yeah.
And God has a wonderful way of revealing secrets in the most inopportune moments, right?
Right. Yes. Right. Very much.
I want to say about this, and I've not been in this position, so it's not like I can say I know what that is, but there are other similar types of things that the same template applies. Honesty is truly the highest form of love. When you are honest with someone, right, it's a declaration of self-love, actually. Never mind to the other person, but to yourself, because it's saying that you can now bring this darkness into the light. And one thing I know about myself, right, and it's another thing saying, oh, well, I'm a narcissist, so accept me that way. That's not what we're saying. It's like, yeah, I've got screw ups. Yeah, I make mistakes every day of my life. Yeah, I got caught there, whatever it might be. Yes, that's my trigger or whatever, It's and yes, I'm sorry or whatever it might be. When we can come forth and actually reveal something like that, especially if it's a big secret like that, right? It is so liberating. Not just for yourself, but for those around you too, because everyone deserves the truth. Everyone deserves the truth. Give me the truth and I'll deal with it any day of the week. Don't bullshit me. And don't try and pull me along by the nose string. And don't give me a pretty face that smiles at me when behind that, I can very well tell you that ain't no pretty face smiling back at me. Right? So it's really about expressing what you need to. And if that is a secret that's holding you back, you have to know it can never be dead and buried, because it's not dead and buried. It's really just in hibernation, and it's going to be waking up. And when that knock comes knocking at your door, or that phone call arrives, or whatever, and it's either a parent or a child that's, in this particular instance, finding you, then that timing is perfect.
Yeah.
And I think that it's so beautiful that you actually had the experiences that you have had, because there's nothing simple about it, right? It's such a intricate road up and down, in and out. But when you are willing, like you have, when you're willing to accept and live by that, and actually not feel the rejection of of believing that you are not good enough, because when you go and you actually investigate your roots, it's obvious that was not the case. That's not why you were given up for adoption. You were forced. Life carried on for the rest of your parents as well. They had their families. It's hard to tell people these things. It's hard to come out with these truths, but it's so important. I mean, we can see just through your story how healing that is.
And I really want to bring it home to anybody that has been in a situation like my dad, and don't be afraid. Don't live a life of regrets. You may have made one mistake. Don't continue to make it. And that I say to I don't care how old you are. We all need a dad. We all need our parents, and we definitely need our biological parents in life. We can love both our biological parents and our adopted parents, just like our parents can love all the children in the family. We can do that. And I think don't be frightened. Don't I saw my dad frightened about different things. I was frightened, but I kept stepping into it. I didn't step away from it. I kept stepping into it. I kept being patient with my dad. So my advice to anybody in this situation is, if you know that you've had a child out there and it's out there in the world somewhere, reach out to that child. And to any adoptees, don't judge your parents until you've gotten to really know them, like even in your first, third and fourth and fifth meeting, because you're not going to see the whole story. They have kept secret after secret to survive the adversity and the difficulties and the judgments that they've had to endure. I got a couple of they said that 9 out of the fathers that were in this study were asked about, whether they thought of their son or daughter, and they said that they always thought of their son or daughter. They asked in the time frame, did you? And these are men in around 58 to 70 years of age, always thought of them. And some fathers describe feelings of guilt in the subsequent years following the adoption of their child. The guilt actually grows in years, like it does with the mother.
Oh, yeah.
Correct? So one father said, I felt I had been the guilty party and carried it as a burden over decades. I felt I could share it with no one, and it was a silent subject in my family. Meeting our daughter and being open about it has been very good. Another father says, I regret not arguing for keeping our daughter at the time of her birth. Her absence from our family leaves a hole in my heart. I wish we could be reunited. Another says, the impact of the adoption on my daughter is my greatest concern. We were led to believe that she would have a better life, that she would be happy. This was not the case. I feel a great deal of shame and guilt for what I put her through. I feel the loss almost every day, even with regular contact. So these are the voices of the fathers that we never hear about. And it's so important that we open dialogue with the fathers to talk about their feelings. They're the ones that are really forgotten in this equation.
I would love to hear more from fathers. I really would. the lost fathers, the ones who were not allowed in on the scene and maybe have reunited afterwards. It'd be really cool to have some guys like that on the show as well, just to hear what they have to say.
I have been talking to a couple of adoptees who have had contact with their dads, and I have put out the invitation for them to join us. And I'm very excited that one lady is seriously thinking about it. Her story is phenomenal. And it's just really lovely. I think sometimes the relationships with dads, when they happen, work out far better. And I wish somebody would do a study on it, but somehow they work better in essence, because I think there's a different type of trauma to the mums and something else occurs in regards to the dads. And so the two ladies I'm thinking of had no clue that they had a daughter taken for adoption, and the fathers are found in their 70s and 80s. And
that is just horrendous.
And they never had any other children, no other children than these daughters that were taken. And even the stats.
Why were they taken? What was the reason for them being taken?
Very much the same. Like Chris's story and my mum's story, that the mums were just vulnerable, and the fathers were not reached out to. They were not. They weren't told. They had. So you get this. This is your child. Nobody comes to you, to the fathers, and go, will you sign adoption papers, or do you willingly give your child up, or do you want your child? Nobody goes to these men, to these fathers, and asks them anything.
Yeah, exactly.
So could you imagine 70 years later, you've never had any children of your own, and you've got a 55-year-old daughter showing up in your doorstep saying, I exist.
Wow.
Like the grief, the joy and the grief that would come with that. Could you imagine? I'm sorry. I know how my dad reacted, and only 24 years have passed. But to go 50, 60 years, my dad at least had other children. These men had no children. They believed that it's horrific what's happened. The grief and the trauma. And what was consistent in this survey was that there's really no counselling services or education to specialists, and that they get this. They just don't.
There's this tragic story that is actually very recent here. One of my friends from Namibia came maybe 2 weeks ago, and I met with her and had coffee with her. And one of her good friends was an adopted girl, and she had just passed away about 2 weeks before I saw her. So let's say a month ago, this woman passed away. And so she's tracked her to someone that I know in this area since I arrived here. Now, this someone is this girl that just passed away, her sister. Is that making sense? So all these years, I have known the Namibian sister and the South African sister, or the best friend. Sorry, not the sister itself, but the best friend of the sister in Namibia. I've known her well. We've been friends for many years, as well as the girl here. So my Namibian friend says to me, "Do you know so and so? I see you friends on Facebook." And I said, "Sure, I know her." And she explains to me that this. Her best friend was the sister of this girl, and they've just discovered it. But her mother, and also she had two other sisters on the South African side, right? The mom was also forced to give up for adoption, didn't even know whether she was a girl or a boy. So they took her, and she all these years thought that she had a son, had no idea. And then as things turned out, and I just sat here and I said, for more than a decade, I've known you and I've known you. Had any of this come to light, it would have been no problem to connect the two.
Wow.
It's so bizarre, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Definitely.
Sadly, that didn't happen, but I was really, and I thought about that a lot. And it's recent.
Yes.
It's like 2 weeks ago that this happened, you know?
Yeah, wow.
But, yeah. So and isn't it crazy how many times this actually happens in life?
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Oh,
That's
definitely.
why we should talk.
Hey?
That's why we should talk. That's why we should talk.
Yes.
Because, we never know
No.
who could be the connector.
Yes. Oh, definitely. And we've got, look, because I've been talking to adoptees and mums since 1982 when I started lobbying and helping in this process. And the stories that I've heard of the freaky stories where you actually worked for your biological mother or father or in the factory, or you grew up being neighbors, or someone married, you're like, it's just uncanny where your lives have actually intercepted somewhere along the way, as if you were never meant to be parted. It's just crazy.
Yeah, exactly.
I see stories even now come up on my feed very often of, father and son were working at the same place. Then they find out they're father and son, and
exactly, or cousins or something.
Crazy.
God forbid you should start dating your cousin.
That's the scary part about it.
So familiar about you.
Yeah, I know. Yes, very scary. But flip side, I think about my dad, and my story's not ended with my dad, because I found out in amongst my dad being very, very unwell, somebody did a DNA test, and I found out I had another sister. So I have another half sister out there that my dad had no idea I know about. And and when I found my dad's brother, and I'm sitting down with them, they're sharing photos and family history and everything, and I get the birth certificate of my uncle, and I go home and I'm reading it, and I'm looking for my dad's name because I had all the children listed, and I couldn't find his name. So I ring up my uncle and I go, well, my dad was older than you, so where is he on your birth certificate? They mentioned the other children. And because my dad's name I knew was Peter, and I'm being very careful not to say my dad's last name for respect for him and his family, right? So I say his name's Peter such and such, and my uncle goes, Kerri, his name's not Peter. And I'm like, what? He goes, his name is John such and such. And my brain is going, so it's not even his real name. And they go, no, because he went AWOL from a marriage in the army, and he went incognito, and he hid on TV in full front in his clown suit.
Right? Taking the mickey out of everyone.
His name. And of course I find out, and so when I did confront my dad in the sense of, well, look, you've kind of told me a fib, you actually have a family, I actually considered writing, because his first name was John, right, not Peter, and I felt like writing him a Dear John letter. That was my joke with him. But so there's so much about my dad that I was finding out. You think you know the truth, you don't, and you consistently have to adjust yourself to what's in front of you and what's behind you, and roll with the punches, but just know that the people standing in front of you, if you're hurt and you're damaged and you've got issues, guarantee they've got equally just the same amount of you, if not more. And learn to, in my view, learn to respect that, learn to nurture through that, and to see it, and don't just see the negative behavior, the not returning phone calls, or the not returning letters, or not calling you daughter in front of people, not acknowledging you, that's born out of pain and trauma and loss and grief and not knowing how to cope in many, many, many cases. And I just want to say that's the same when mothers search for adoptees and vice versa. There's a lot of pain there and a lot of trauma. We need to be kind to one another through the process. Be kind. Be kind to yourself as well. Don't be so hard on yourself.
Totally. I think I put that, it's a Rumi, Krishna Das, actually. He said, can't remember the whole quote now, but it's basically when people are not giving you what they want, it's not because anything is wrong with you.
Yeah.
It's because it's because they are being them and not because you are you. So stop being so hard on yourself. I think that's such a beautiful saying, because we tend to think, what have I done? You think of this, you think of that. Meanwhile, it's got nothing to do with you. It's really the person that can't deal with that. And I think, on that note, sure, KERRI, it's been an amazing conversation again with you about this. And please, guys, share this stuff. Like, share, subscribe, please, because these are really the conversations we as human beings need to be having with each other. I don't give a shit who's ruling what country right now and what have you. Really, that's the distraction, because they've taken us so far away from our roots, from our connection. And really, it's about reconnecting with each other. Even if you don't like the outcome of what happened, if you're an adoptee or an adoptive parent or whatever it might be, whatever, in whatever situation, even if you don't like the outcome, at least you know the truth. When you know the truth, it gives you a sense of peace. So, and this is, as I say, these are really the conversations we must be having at this point in time. And I hope more and more and more of you join in on these conversations so we can collectively find solutions. There's nothing better than, we're such sociable beings as humans, right? And yet we are so scared of each other. We are so terrified. I mean, how many times do you hear people say, well, I love animals, but I hate humans? That's sad, because really at the end of the day, it's just people that can't deal with their own wounds. And we really have to start with that, cleaning up our own wounds.
Yeah.
Anyway, on that note, Dragonfly, I'm so happy for your happy ending, I have to say.
And I want to, yes. And I want to thank everybody for their beautiful comments and Wild Aussie Woman, I'm so pleased that I got to know my dad. And I'm so pleased I can talk about him here. And thank you, Chantel. I think when you asked me to start, invited me to tell my story, I didn't imagine I would still be here many, many months later, sharing my story. And really, it surprised me the depth as well of what adoption is and what it isn't, and where it's taken me. And I want to thank you for inviting me to be here and share. It's so special. It really is, because it validates my journey, and it validates the importance of it and truth, and it validates that we don't need to keep secrets, and validates I'm so grateful I've survived. It was been a really hard journey at times, and I'm really, really grateful. And I'm grateful to the people that have come into my life that may have not fully understood but have supported me as well. So I just want to say thank you. And I want to say I love my dad, and I'm going to miss him very much. And I thank you for allowing me this time to talk about him.
KERRI, it's such a pleasure to have you. And I'm so happy that you feel safe enough to talk about him here. And, it's such an amazing community we have here. There's no doubt in my mind, we're a force to be reckoned with.
Yes.
Definitely. And it's such a pleasure, it's such a pleasure having this platform. And as a healer, I just love hearing these stories, because this is where the healing sits, It's not some magical person going, you healed, off you go. Not at all. It's us taking that step forward, building our spiritual muscles again and our emotional muscles, and having our friends and our buddies alongside us who can walk this path with us, and meeting people across the world who think the same as we do when we, for so many years, thought we crazy, right?
Yes.
And then we get a whole bunch of crazy, like, yeah, party time. We're meeting on error.
Very much.
Absolutely. Yeah. Really great to have you. And thank you so much for always sharing and the research you do and the investigations and just the amazing information you come up with on these topics. So really look forward to having you back again in a couple of weeks. We're talking about some cool other people on the show as well. And I want to really just use this opportunity to extend the invitation to our viewers. You know, if you are someone who fits the profile on whatever level here, either an adoptee or an adoptive, someone who lost your child to the system, or again, one of the kids, and you've come through stuff, we'd love to hear your story. We really would. You know, this is not a platform for people that have been kings and queens or whatever, now telling them, not at all. This platform is for everyone. This is the people's platform for sure. If you've got a story, share it. It's healing for you. It's healing for the world. And the more of us who heal, the better it becomes for everyone, actually. So on that note, I shall no longer babble. We've been around for nearly 90 minutes, and that's a good plan for a Friday. So take care, everybody. Enjoy your weekend. Please like, share, subscribe. Again, Kerri, thank you so much. Take good care of yourself. We'd love to hear from you. Leave us some comments. Keep the discussion alive. And last but not least, God bless you all. Thank you. Cheers, guys.
Bye.